October 30th, 1961. A Soviet bomber takes off from Olenya Air Base in northern Russia. The pilot knows he has a 50% chance of surviving what comes next. Inside the bomb bay hangs a weapon so large it needed its own specially modified aircraft to carry it. 8 meters long, 27 tons. The largest nuclear weapon ever detonated in the history of humanity. This is the Tsar Bomba, and it was never used in war. The bomb was the brainchild of Soviet physicist Andrei Sakharov, the same man who later became one of the most famous peace activists in Soviet history. The original design called for a yield of 100 megatons. 100 megatons. To put that in perspective, the bomb dropped on Hiroshima was 15 kilotons. The Tsar Bomba at 100 megatons would have been 6,667 times more powerful than Hiroshima. The Soviet scientists actually reduced the yield to 50 megatons before detonation, because at 100 megatons, they were not confident the bomber would escape the blast radius in time. Even at 50 megatons, the reduced, safer version, the blast was incomprehensible. The fireball alone was 8 kilometers wide. If detonated over London, the fireball would have stretched from the center of the city to beyond Heathrow Airport. The thermal pulse, the wave of pure heat, would have caused third-degree burns as far away as 100 kilometers from the blast. Every window in every building within 900 kilometers would have shattered. That is the distance from London to Munich. In one detonation, the test took place over Novaya Zemlya, a remote Arctic archipelago. The closest town was 55 kilometers away. Every wooden building there was destroyed by the shockwave. Every wooden building, 55 kilometers away. The mushroom cloud rose 67 kilometers into the atmosphere. That is 7 times the cruising altitude of a commercial aircraft. The cloud was visible from 1,000 kilometers away. The seismic shockwave circled the Earth 3 times. The bomb was so powerful that the bomber carrying it out of the blast zone was made almost entirely of reflective white paint to deflect the thermal pulse, and still lost 50% of its surface paint from the heat. The pilot survived by the smallest possible margin. When asked why the Soviet Union built the Tsar Bomba, the answer was not military strategy. The Tsar Bomba was never actually intended to be used as a weapon. It was a message, a demonstration of Soviet nuclear capability designed entirely to terrify the United States. And it worked. American intelligence analysts described the Tsar Bomba test as the single most terrifying event of the entire Cold War. Not the Cuban Missile Crisis, not Sputnik, a single bomb test over the Arctic. That was never meant to be fired at anyone. The Tsar Bomba currently sits in a Russian nuclear museum in Sarov, behind glass, the most powerful weapon ever detonated in human history, sitting in a museum. But the Tsar Bomba is not even the most terrifying weapon on this list. Weapon 2, Project Thor, Rods from God. Project Thor, also known as Rods from God. This was a United States military concept developed during the Cold War, and it remains one of the most terrifying ideas ever seriously proposed by a military. The concept was simple. Take a tungsten metal rod, 6 meters long, 30 centimeters in diameter. Put it in orbit around the Earth, and when you need to destroy a target anywhere on Earth, you simply drop the rod from orbit. The rod re-enters the atmosphere, accelerates to Mach 10, that is approximately 12,000 kilometers per hour, and hits the target with the kinetic energy equivalent to a nuclear weapon. No nuclear warhead required, no radioactive fallout, no international treaty violations, just a metal rod, moving at Mach 10. The impact would create a crater 30 meters deep, and generate a shockwave equivalent to a small nuclear bomb. The most terrifying aspect of Project Thor was not the damage it could cause. It was the speed of deployment. A conventional nuclear missile can be tracked by radar, intercepted by anti-missile defense systems, and gives approximately 30 minutes of warning time. A tungsten rod from orbit gives 0 warning. 0. By the time any radar system detects it, the rod is already underground. The system was nicknamed Rods from God because of how it would appear to a target. A metal bar falling from a clear sky. No warning, no sound, no flash, just destruction. The United States Air Force estimated the cost of deploying the full Project Thor system at between $5 and $50 billion. The cost was the only reason it was never built, not because it was too dangerous, Not because international law prevented it, because it was too expensive. The rods are still theoretically sitting in classified military planning documents, waiting for the day the budget allows, and the technology to put them into orbit becomes cheap enough. Project Thor was never built, but it was never cancelled either. It is still an open concept in United States military planning. The next weapon on this list was actually tested, and the test results were so disturbing they buried the program immediately. Weapon 3, Project Pluto. Project Pluto, 1957 to 1964. The United States decided to build a nuclear-powered cruise missile. Not nuclear-armed, nuclear-powered. The engine, called SLAM, Supersonic Low-Altitude Missile, used an unshielded nuclear reactor as its power source. An unshielded reactor, meaning the missile itself was a flying Chernobyl. The heat from the unshielded reactor was so intense it would vaporize the air passing through the engine, creating a nuclear-powered ramjet capable of flying at Mach 3. The plan was for the missile to fly at low altitude over enemy territory continuously for weeks, dropping nuclear bombs along its flight path. And here is where it gets truly horrifying. Even if the missile ran out of nuclear bombs to drop, it was still a weapon of mass destruction, because the unshielded nuclear reactor was pumping lethal radiation directly into the atmosphere from its exhaust. Every kilometer the missile flew was a radioactive wasteland left behind it. The sonic boom alone from flying at low altitude at Mach 3 would have destroyed buildings on the ground directly below. So the weapon was simultaneously dropping nuclear bombs, irradiating the atmosphere and destroying buildings with its sonic boom. All at the same time, the engineers who worked on Project Pluto called it the Flying Crowbar, because once launched, it couldn't be recalled. It had no off switch. The program was canceled in 1964, not because the technology did not work. The technology worked. It was canceled because military planners realized there was no way to test it safely. Any test flight over American territory would have contaminated everything below it. There was nowhere on Earth to test it without permanently contaminating the test site. So they canceled it and buried the documents. Project Pluto never flew over enemy territory. But the fact that serious military engineers spent 7 years building it tells you everything you need to know about the Cold War. The next weapon was not a missile or a bomb. Weapon 4, Cobalt Bomb. The Cobalt Bomb, also known as the Salted Bomb. This weapon was never built by any nation on Earth, and every serious physicist who has studied it has concluded it is the closest thing to a genuine doomsday weapon that physics allows. The concept was first described by physicist Leo Szilard in 1950, the same physicist who had helped design the first nuclear bomb. He described it not as a proposal, but as a warning that this weapon was theoretically possible, that if any nation ever built one, it could end all human life on Earth. Not just end civilization, end all human life. Here's how it works. A conventional nuclear bomb is surrounded by a jacket of cobalt-59. When the nuclear bomb detonates, the cobalt jacket is converted into cobalt-60, one of the most lethal radioactive isotopes known to science. Cobalt-60 has a half-life of over 5 years, which means the radiation it produces does not fade quickly. It lingers in the atmosphere for decades. A single cobalt bomb detonated in the right location and altitude could theoretically spread lethal cobalt-60 radiation across the entire planet. The entire planet. Every continent. Every ocean. Every city. Making Earth uninhabitable for human life for decades. This is what physicists call a doomsday device. Not a metaphor, a literal doomsday device, and no nation has ever built one. Not because it is technically impossible, it is technically very straightforward to build. No nation has built one because there is no military use for a weapon that kills everyone, including yourself. The Cobalt Bomb is the only weapon in this video that was never built, not because of cost, not because of technical difficulty, but because even the people who design weapons for a living looked at it and said no. Weapon 5, Davy Crockett, Nuclear Bazooka. The Davy Crockett, named after the American folk hero. This was a nuclear weapon small enough for 3 soldiers to carry, and fire from a recoilless rifle, essentially a bazooka. The United States Army deployed 2,100 of these weapons to Europe during the Cold War. 2,100 portable nuclear weapons, sitting in the hands of small 3-man infantry teams, scattered across West Germany. The weapon had a yield of 10 to 20 tons, small for a nuclear weapon. But here's the problem. The Davy Crockett had a maximum range of 4 kilometers and a lethal radiation radius of 500 meters from the blast. The soldiers firing it were within the lethal radiation zone. Every single time they fired it, the Davy Crockett was designed to be used in a battlefield scenario in Europe if Soviet forces were advancing through West Germany. The plan was for 3-man teams to fire nuclear weapons at advancing Soviet tanks and then, somehow, survive. Military planners called this a tactical nuclear weapon. The soldiers who trained with it called it a suicide weapon. The Davy Crockett was tested once at the Nevada test site in 1962. Test footage shows the projectile tumbling through the air erratically. The accuracy was described by military observers as, and I am quoting here, terrible. A nuclear weapon with terrible accuracy in a battlefield full of your own soldiers. The Davy Crockett was retired in 1971, never fired in combat, which, given the accuracy problem and the lethal radius issue, is almost certainly why everyone involved survived. The next weapon was not American, not Soviet, it was British. Weapon 6 Blue Peacock, nuclear landmine. Blue Peacock, officially a British nuclear landmine, designed to be buried in the West German countryside during peacetime, and detonated remotely if Soviet forces invaded. Each Blue Peacock had a yield of 10 kilotons, the same as the Hiroshima bomb. The British military buried 10 of them across West Germany. 10 buried nuclear bombs in a country that belonged to an ally, without telling the West German government exactly where they were. Now here is the part that nobody talks about. The British engineers discovered a problem. In winter temperatures, the electronics inside the Blue Peacock would freeze, making the nuclear mine unreliable. Their solution to keeping a buried nuclear bomb warm enough to detonate reliably was to pack live chickens inside the bomb casing. Live chickens inside a nuclear bomb casing. The chicken's body heat would keep the electronics warm enough to function. The chickens would be provided with food and water through a small internal supply, enough for approximately 1 week, after which the chickens would die. But the planners calculated that by then, either the Soviets had invaded and the bombs had been detonated, or the crisis had passed and they would dig the bombs up. When this information was declassified by the British government in 2004, historians initially assumed it was an April Fool's joke. It was not. Blue Peacock was a real British military program, with real buried nuclear bombs, with real chickens inside them. The program was cancelled in 1958 and the mines were never detonated. Nobody knows exactly what happened to the chickens. Weapon 7, FOAB, father of all bombs. On September 11, 2007, Russia announced it had tested a new weapon, the aviation thermobaric bomb of increased power, or as Russian military officials called it, the father of all bombs, named as a direct response to the American MOAB, the mother of all bombs. The MOAB, mother of all bombs, yields 11 tons of TNT equivalent. The FOAB, father of all bombs, yields 44 tons of TNT equivalent, 4 times more powerful, with a blast radius of 300 meters. But here's what makes the father of all bombs genuinely different from any conventional explosive. It is a thermobaric weapon. It does not use a conventional explosive charge. Instead, it disperses a fine mist of explosive fuel into the air over the target, then ignites it. The resulting explosion consumes all available oxygen in the blast area, creating a vacuum. Then, the vacuum collapses inward. The combination of the explosion outward and the collapse inward creates a pressure wave that travels through solid structures, through bunkers, through underground tunnels, through anything. Russia claims the FOB is as powerful as a tactical nuclear weapon. Without the radioactive fallout, the FOAB was tested once in 2007 and has never been used in combat. Russia has not confirmed how many FOAB units exist in its arsenal, or whether they plan to use them. Weapon 8, Novichok. Novichok, the name means newcomer in Russian, developed by the Soviet Union in the 1970s and 1980s under a classified program called Folian. Novichok is a class of nerve agents, estimated to be between 5 and 10 times more toxic than the VX nerve agent. VX is the nerve agent already considered the most lethal chemical weapon in existence. Novichok works by blocking a specific enzyme in the nervous system. Within seconds of exposure, the victim loses control of every muscle in their body, simultaneously. Death typically occurs from respiratory failure within minutes. There is no antidote that fully reverses exposure. A dose of 1 to 10 milligrams is lethal. That is an amount invisible to the naked eye. Novichok was never deployed as a battlefield weapon during the Cold War, but it was used in 2018 in Salisbury, England, when Russian agents poisoned former spy Sergei Skripal and his daughter. Both survived, but a local woman who accidentally came into contact with discarded Novichok died from a substance so lethal that it had been in a perfume bottle discarded in a rubbish bin for months. Novichok remains one of the most tightly controlled substances on Earth, and the Soviet stockpiles have never been fully accounted for. Nobody knows exactly how much exists, or where it is, or who has it. Weapon 9, Excalibur Space Laser. A space-based nuclear-powered X-ray laser weapon, designed to destroy Soviet intercontinental ballistic missiles in flight. The concept was a nuclear bomb detonated in space, which would produce a directed beam of X-ray energy, focusing the nuclear energy into a laser powerful enough to destroy a missile from orbit. This was a core part of Ronald Reagan's Strategic Defense Initiative in 1983, known publicly as Star Wars. The program was tested underground at the Nevada test site. Results were classified and disputed. Some scientists claimed the tests proved the concept worked. Others claimed the test data was falsified. Project Excalibur was quietly cancelled in 1992, never deployed, never fully explained. The classified test results remain sealed to this day. Every weapon on this list shared one thing in common. They were all created, all tested or designed, and all held back from actual use. Not because of morality, not because of international law, but because of something much simpler. They were too dangerous for the people who built them. A bomb that kills everyone, including yourself. A missile you cannot call back. A radiation weapon that poisons your own territory. The Cold War was not stopped by diplomacy. It was stopped by the fact that the weapons became so powerful that using them meant destroying everything, including the side that fired them. The most powerful weapons in human history were never used because they were too powerful for anyone to survive using them. Subscribe to Revelox for more facts about the history they never taught you in school.